This is the story of a girl who got a river and drowned the whole world. There's our theme song right there.
Who sings that?
Like, I don't know, like Bare Naked Ladies or something. It was in that season of Bare Naked Ladies season.
If you told someone who didn't know about 90s music that Bare Naked Ladies was a band, they would not believe you.
I know. I that took me like 5 years to realize that they were saying Bare Naked Ladies.
What on earth did you think they were saying?
I just thought it was that, I don't know. I just thought, oh, it's just that band. That's really, really great band. And it's Bare Naked Ladies was the title. I'm surprised my parents even let me listen to it.
Welcome, everyone, to the Infertility Feelings Podcast.
And that song is so fitting. This is the story of a girl who cries a river down the whole world. It's fitting for this podcast.
Where we talk about infertility and
fear.
Your feelings.
Sorry, today we're talking about fear, so I thought that was my throw to talk about fear.
Infertility obviously causes a ton of emotions. And one of the primary emotions that it causes for most people is fear. Mm-hmm. And we're going to jump back into our story a little bit and talk about that moment where we first kind of brought into our own reality. Like we started to process what we were going through, and it looked like very bleak, right?
Very bleak.
So we had to bring into our heads like, okay, is this really happening? Mm-hmm. And I think for both of us, there was a lot of fear, a lot of fear. So we're going to break down fear a little bit.
And what's hard is our deepest, scariest fear came true. The deepest fear was that we couldn't have our own children, and that came true. So how did we survive that? I don't know. I'm just kidding.
No one knows. Well, let's talk about it. Jesse, take us back to, gosh, what was it, like 2013?
It was 2012.
2012.
We did the thing. We'd been married for 5 years. Yep. And we did the thing of like, let's get off birth control and have babies.
We said, let's go to New York and get pregnant. That was
which is so funny because we're in the city the whole entire day and we're exhausted at night. Like that was hilarious to go to that city and start having babies.
Let's go walk 13 miles and then go have kids. That's,
I mean, maybe not New York City. Go to like Costa Rica, like some beach where it's just like you're rested.
But I mean, it's like a fantasy, right?
Yeah.
So it's let's just have some fun, as newlyweds, and then
newlyweds. We were 5 years married.
I'm just saying, like let's start, and then let's start having kids, and we'll have a bunch of kids, and then we'll do that portion of our life. Mm-hmm. And once we realized there was problems, the greatest fear is like, well, what if everything that we had hoped for in life really ends up not being true? So take us back. What was it like that?
Yes. So you want me to tell the story of what happened?
Yeah. Tell the story and then tell us about the fear.
Yeah. So we started trying for a year. I had a feeling that something was wrong always. I had in the back of my mind that something was wrong.
Wait, I'm sorry. Why do so many people say that? I think it's true that people feel that.
I know.
But I've heard of so many stories of people saying, I just knew something was wrong.
I have no idea. It was just a feeling in this like upper area of my chest right here. Maybe some call it the heart. The heart is I just had this sinking feeling. And I think probably a lot of women think that, and don't have any issues. But yeah, I just think, I don't know why, if we just live in a failure society where it's like, it's going to be me. I don't know.
Anyway, sorry for interrupting. I think it's interesting that comes up.
Yeah, because you didn't think that.
I never thought about it at all.
Right.
I never thought about infertility at all.
Right.
But so
I didn't have a name for it. I didn't have infertility as a name for it. I just thought this is something I'm going to struggle with. I just know it. I don't know why.
Yeah, interesting.
I don't know why.
Keep going.
Because my mom had no problem having kids, so I literally don't know why I felt that way. I don't know. And so we went and we tried for a year, went to the doctor. I got very much like the doctor response of like, just relax, it'll happen. It's only been 12 times because in a year you only can try 12 times or whatever. So then we got you checked. And that was really hard. It was an up and down journey of that. And then we went to an infertility doctor and you had issues. You have low sperm mobility, and then I have low ovarian reserve, which was really, really hard. I remember doing the ultrasound and I remember looking at his face and he was like, huh. And you never want the doctor or like a hairdresser to be like, huh.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, huh.
The disappointment in a professional's eyes is never good.
Yeah, or when they don't say anything, you're like, this is not good. You know what I mean? He told me I had a beautiful uterus, though. Beautiful uterus. Eggs, crap. Uterus, great. So, so we went, I remember going to his office and him telling us, and then him being like, we're going to have a 1% chance of having bio kids on our own. And so it was kind of like, that was so bleak. And we were like, okay, we're not gonna have children of our own. But I feel like he, in a good way, kind of, it's like gave us hope though, that there's hope as in IUI and IVF, right. Even though IUI was not, he said we should just do it once to see, but it didn't have high possibilities with that either. Right. So we did one IUI and one IVF and they both failed. At the end of our IVF, we only had one egg at the end of it, which was really, really difficult.
Gosh.
You know, remember that?
Yeah. I mean,
and that was just a hard season too. So,
it felt like maybe it was a financial thing for us, but it felt like this was our chance. And to hear that some people end up with anything more than one was like, oh great. Well, maybe we'll do this portion a couple times.
Right.
But to find out it was only one, it just was, that was heartbreaking. Yeah.
And you were not with me when I was getting my egg.
I know.
So I went into the office.
Sorry.
It's okay. It was your job at the time, which you're not doing that job anymore. Jeez. But yeah, you had to be there because it was like 2 times a year. You had to be there on that day for your job. And so I went with my best friend thinking that I had 5 eggs.
It was gonna be like a celebration, like, let's go.
Yeah. And so I told my best friend, and my mother-in-law was waiting for me in the, my mom was on a trip and my mother-in-law was waiting for me in the waiting room. It's a great support team. I love that I had that. Yeah. And I remember going in and the whole entire, like you wait like 5 days to see your eggs or whatever. And it was the 5th day and thinking I was going to have 5 eggs, thinks we were going to put in 2 eggs. And then it was just 1. And oh my gosh, I was shocked. Shocked. Yeah. And then it was weird because you didn't know. Right. And I'm like, you're just as involved in this as I am. You're 100% in it like I am. Right. And so that felt weird. That felt so weird to be. So, but I was so glad I had my best friend there she was able to help me. And I was so glad that she knew everything and I was open. So, but that was just weird having like 3 to 4 hours because I didn't want to call you when you were at your job and then have you like suck at your job.
Were you able to, at that moment, like comprehend that?
No.
Were you starting to think, going back to the fear, was it like, oh my gosh, this isn't going to work. Oh my gosh, we're not going to have kids. Oh, did you go, or was it just
pure
shock?
Survival mode?
Just survival shock.
Yeah. Pure survival mode.
That makes sense.
And I remember feeling all the feelings, but then having to be like, okay, but there's still hope. You know what I mean? Because we still have one. Like I remember looking at it and it was like all my eggs were on this piece of paper and like the ones that were not good were like almost like not as good quality image either. It felt like they were like dark. I was like, what? And then there was this one shiny egg. I know.
Maybe that might have been
It was in my mind. It was like, oh, this okay. They just not good. And then I had that one and I think it was weird. It was like so devastating, but then also I felt like I had to be hopeful. Yeah. But then I just didn't like that you didn't know. I didn't like that. I didn't like that I had to be the one. So me had to go home after you were done with your job and tell you that we only had 1 egg. That just sucked.
Yeah. And you know what's funny? It makes me think of COVID because so many people are going to their appointments by themselves.
Yes. I feel you now. I get it.
Right. Yeah. Like having to experience that and fill in your partner.
Yeah.
You know, by calling them or something. Yeah. It's a weird time.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I wanted my best friend to stay with me. Not that I was like afraid of your reaction, but I'm the one that told you. And that just feels weird.
That feels weird. Yeah. So when did the fear kick in? Was it after that? Like after we had gotten home, the transfer?
Yeah. My doctor recommended that I stay on bed rest for 2 days, which some don't. But I remember having like moments of that, of just like, it's such a brain game. It's such like I have hope, I'm scared to death. I have hope, I'm scared to death. You know what I mean? So I had a lot of fear in that time. I had a lot of fear that it wasn't going to work.
And what were you, I mean, I know what I was afraid of, but what were you afraid of? Like what was
this is our shot.
Yeah.
We didn't have a ton of money and we had done everything humanly possible that we could. Whatever the doctor said, we did. Acupuncture, we did. And our diagnosis together wasn't even great for IVF. So it was like, okay, you know what I mean? I think that, and I just didn't want to do it again. I was just like, it's not that it was just a lot. It was just a lot. And I really truly felt like because we didn't have a lot of money and because it was just such a bleak thing that I just was like, this is our one shot. And that we only got 1 egg. I'm like, are we going to do this again and just get one egg again? It's like, that
Remember
just
they
seems,
said that. They said, we could do this again, but he said, I would assume
that you would get the same results.
The offices, the whole clinic's kind of attitude was, I wouldn't expect anything much different than this.
Yeah. That's not to say that someone else that has low ovarian reserve and have those things won't get different. It's
and it
just
doesn't to say, it doesn't mean we shouldn't have done it or not done it. I just even remember that being fearful, you know?
Yeah. I remember sitting in the office for your come back and see if you want to do it again appointment. And he was like, well, you got very bleak. You'll probably get the same amount, but you should totally do it again. And I was like, what?
Yeah. It's tough.
You know what I mean? Even though he was great and whatever, but so my biggest fear.
Being true. So take us being true to the name of our podcast. What does it feel like to have to process that much fear about your future, about whether you're going to have kids or not? Mm-hmm. And what does that feel like? You know, how do you do that as a person?
I don't know if it was then that I did it well, if you would say. Okay. I think I was in survival mode. And I think that because we had such a bleak diagnosis, it was easier in some ways to turn to adoption. So it's almost like my focus changed. It's almost like when you're struggling with infertility and you're going through all this stuff, you're so hyper-focused. And it's almost like my focus turned into hyper-focused of adoption or whatever. Okay. And then it was when the adoption journey was I'm trying to solve all my problems. I'm trying to save all my baby problems and all of that over here with this. And that even was after we took in our son, at 18 months. So
I think this is exactly
hyper-focused.
And I think that's exactly what many people do. And it's what I did. It's what I think all of us do is we have this fear that what we started out to do isn't working. We wanted to have kids. It's not working. So out of that fear creates this hyper focus, like you said, or, anxiety maybe is another word for it. And we try to alleviate our fear by having that fear not come into reality,
Yeah.
It's so if we get kids, this thing that we're afraid of will not be, you know?
And what's weird is I almost felt relieved.
Was it okay, that road is closed?
Yes.
Now we can.
Well, kind of. I wasn't ready to close it completely. I was ready to close it for that season. Because you were like, let's get out of here. Let's adopt some babies and just stop doing this. Yeah. So, but then that almost made me feel guilty.
Like it's that easy.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But it's it was almost for me, I was almost a little bit relieved to be I don't want to do this anymore. And that you would feel guilty. Do I not want it enough?
What did that do for the fear? Did that make it feel okay, the incredibly risky world for us of IVF, we don't have to worry about that anymore?
Yeah. Wait, what do you mean?
When it comes to walking away and starting to pursue some of the other options like adoption, foster care, was it easier to do that because it was IVF was scary?
Yeah, totally. I was scared to do it again. I was completely scared to do it again. Yeah. But it was almost I didn't necessarily deal with the trauma that I had just gone through. I just was okay, I was hyper-focused then, and then I'm going to turn over here. And I did not realize how off my head I was until I stopped taking the IVF medicine and all that. In the moment, I can look back, in the time I can look back and be oh, we were running late and I treated that as in we were losing all our house. That was the reaction that I had. Right. You know what I mean? But I didn't necessarily feel that. I think because you're so hyper-focused in that it was once IVF, we were decided that we were going to move on to adoption. It was I almost felt a sense of relief. And then I felt oh, I feel my old self again. Oh, I'm coming back. I didn't realize how much I was feeling and dealing with in that. You know what I mean? Yeah. But then my hyper-focus kind of changed to adoption and I kind of put that on adoption, even though I said I didn't. I was I'm trying to not solve all my problems with adoption. And then I was oh, yes, you are. And that
everyone reads one Instagram post about not solving your infertility with adoption. They're totally, I'm not.
Totally. That's not me.
And we can say that because we did that.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I did that.
Yeah. It's hard.
And it was my therapist.
It's hard. It's not easy.
No. And
you think you can intellectually get it, but to really get it.
Right.
That's another.
Right. And it was my therapist. It was my therapist after we adopted our son. And he was wonderful and great. But I remember thinking, even in the first couple months of having him, I remember thinking, wow, I feel the same. I still feel a longing.
Right.
I still feel a desire. And it's that's weird. Right. I feel that would have checked that box for me of oh, you got a kid. And I also felt this is deep, but I also felt like, not deep, whatever, but it's like deep in myself of like, I remember thinking how much I still lost my temper with him. I was short. I wanted sleep. And you would think someone like us and someone like me who struggled with infertility for a long time, had such a bleak diagnosis, was excited to adopt, and had nothing to do with him being adopted. That I was shocked that I wasn't every day Cinderella, open the curtains and the mice come, and I'm just this like fluttering being that's just
never
like
stressed out.
I'm just never stressed, and you are a perfect child. And you know, like that was something that was really hard for me. That was really mind blowing to me in the months that we first got him, of like how much I was still struggling.
Right.
When I thought it would just be like, check that box, you got a kid, all those feelings are gone.
Right.
And I remember and then I remember thinking, oh no, I have to go back and feel all those feelings that I was trying to run away from. Ooh, I didn't want to do that.
Okay, it makes me think about this. And I think this is where our idea of a trauma-informed approach to infertility comes in, is that fear, in a lot of ways, is a good emotion.
Yeah, it's not all bad.
Think about if you're hiking in the woods and you and your friends stumble upon a bear. You know, you're like, that's terrifying. There's this big old bear. We want to, take the appropriate measures to protect ourselves. Maybe you move to another trail, you go the other way, you ring a little bell, whatever you do, because it's scary to see a bear in the woods, right? The problem is that what happens if that bear then gets in your car with you and comes home with you and now lives with you and is in every moment of your life? The fear doesn't go away. And I think that's what happens.
That's good. Wait.
I think that's what happens with infertility, is this great fear that we have that I'm not going to have kids and I'm not going to have this future that I want. We don't get away from it. There's no like, okay, the fear caused me to do something. And then I did that thing and now the fear is gone. It's this ongoing fear that doesn't go away. And like you just said, that's exactly how I felt. I felt this fear of I'm not going to have this family that I wanted to have. But that fear was there. It was always there. But when I left IVF, I just thought, well, I'll solve the fear of that by adopting, or doing whatever it was. I thought I could solve that fear. I could make the fear go away by just solving the problem. And then the real issue is that we needed to do something actually with the emotion of fear that was coming up, because all of the situational things we did, it wasn't going away. And now we just lived in this anxious, for me, it was an anxious, fearful, high stress environment all the time. When I'm sitting at home watching a show, it's like I felt the same fear as when we were doing the transfer, which is like, you don't want to live. That's hard to live like that. I didn't want to live like that.
Right. Ooh, that's like PTSD.
Yeah. I mean, it could lead to PTSD.
Yeah, it could lead to PTSD.
For sure. Yeah. But I think that's, it's something that we don't want to talk about, because it's, again, I think the point of this podcast is to talk about our feelings and talk about what it feels like to go through infertility. And I think what it feels like to go through infertility is to live with fear. Right.
And I think when it all came crumbling down, and I think we both, or for me, I realized that, I got some work to do, is when we wanted to adopt our second one.
Yeah.
And for me, it had to be an infant. Had to be. No other option. Because we adopted our son at 18 months, which was totally great. And I loved it. And he was so cute and awesome and great. And our community loved him so well. And he fit right in. He was so great. He's so great. But I remember thinking, like, okay, I'll do the 18-month thing, but next time it's going to be an infant. And
go.
And that was fear.
Yes. Yeah.
Complete and utter fear. If I never have an infant, and I'm pretty darn good with infants too. Like, I love infants. Great. I love all types of babies. 2-year-olds are my favorite. But it's like I really felt like I was good with babies. And so that was kind of in my mind too. Like, of course, like, why wouldn't I want an infant? You know what I mean? And this is not everyone's path. Everyone's path is different. You can want to adopt after IVF an infant, and that's totally fine. But for me, I remember I was really trying to solve my fear. I was so afraid that I would never have an infant. And that's when I realized, and kind of my world came crashing down when we had 2 infant adoption fails. And in those adoptions, I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? And they changed their mind to parent their own child.
Right. Which is a good decision.
But those were so devastating for me. And it took our second loss to be like, oh, I have this suitcase with me that I've carried through this whole journey. And it's a fear suitcase of like with IVF and all that and our infertility journey that I was trying to solve with this. And that's when I really started to be like, oh my gosh, I need to get my butt into therapy and really grieve this. But it took some time because I think I was still in survival mode. And I think that's when we finally went, okay, like we got to release some of this stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Do you think that's the fear, like you said, that was in the suitcase was I'm not going to have an infant? Like specifically,
if I didn't have an infant, that was the final nail in the coffin that I'm never going to have my own biological child. Even though it wasn't my own biological child, it was.
You feel like that was the main focal point of the fear of that?
Yes, was fear. I didn't get to have an infant on my own, so I'm going to. It's like everything that I had lost with infertility, I had slowly been like, okay, I'm going to let that go. Okay, I'm not going to have a birth story. Okay, I'm not going to breastfeed. Okay, all these things. I'm never going to go to a shower for myself pregnant. Like that's something for a girl. I'm never going to have this surprise of like, I'm pregnant. Right. So everything I kind of was like, okay. But then I looked at adoption of like, what can I make happen here that I didn't get here?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I'm mic dropping over here.
Do you think that like for me too, I think there's one thing, there's a general fear, right? Of like, we're struggling to grow our family. This isn't easy. And there's like all this fear that comes up, but there's one thing that it's like, that's the one I can't let go of.
Exactly.
That's the one thing I'm actually really afraid of.
Yes.
I think for you as an infant, for me, it was a timing thing. For me, it was like, I don't want to have my first kid when I'm 37 or something like that, You don't
want to be old dad.
I wanted,
Which is so funny.
Weird.
You're not old. 37 is not that old, right?
But I mean, I don't even want to say that it's weird. It was just my thing. It was like, okay, this isn't working, but what can we do as quick as possible to figure this out and turn it around so that we can get some kids in the house really quick? It was a time thing for me.
And what's sad is, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but we made a lot of bad decisions that way.
So many bad decisions.
And so much money. And that's this podcast for another time. But it's like, we made so many bad decisions, I think, because of your desperateness.
Yes.
To be like, I don't want to be an old dad. I want, and your desperateness to solve my infant thing.
Yes.
I think too, is you own that as the leader of like kind of adoption and dealing with birth moms and dealing with facilitators and dealing with all that. It's like you kind of took on the role, and then your anxiety and your fear and your stress kind of led us down a path of bad decisions. I love you, by the way. Yes. I'm not holding that against you.
No, please hold it against me, because it was a combination of my desire to solve this problem quickly, and your desire for the solution to the problem to be an infant.
Yeah, because I held that so tight.
It was a deadly mix for us, and at the root of it was our inability to grieve.
There's the word.
The fear of those two things. An infant for you and timing for me.
And I remember the day.
Yeah, we had like there's this moment where like grief is a pain, but it heals other pains.
Yeah, I
right?
know.
It's a difficult thing, but it's the solution sometimes to other difficult things. And it was like our unwillingness to really go into the grieving process about these two things that we were holding on to, and about the fear behind it.
I know. I remember the day.
Tell us about the day.
I remember, do you remember me telling you this all the time? Like, I'm totally fine with letting these things go, but I just want this one thing.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Because also when you are told that you can't have your own biological children, for me, I had a really hard time not being able to maybe name my child. So I thought if I had an infant, I could name my own child. Right. And that was really important to me too. I remember the day sitting in therapy, and it was just like a revolving ball. Like, why does it, and I remember I always talking about the infant thing and, not being open to anything else. And my therapist was like, why does it have to be an infant? And I knew what she was doing in her mind. She's like, because this is what you put everything on, but she's like, just ask me that. And I just went, it's like, that scene in Bug's Life If everyone's seen Bug's Life, where
Yes.
he like
Zooms in on his head,
where he
yeah.
zooms in, where the bugs tell him they're actually circus animals, and it's like they zoom in, it's like it's like that was me in the therapist's office by myself, like, oh my gosh, because I'm trying to solve my infertility, and that's
Right.
exactly what I said. I said I'm not ready to let that go.
Right.
And she's like, and I remember she said, that's a lot to put on a kid.
Yeah, it's a lot to put on an infant.
That's a lot to put on an infant. Like, don't you think they're a little small to carry that load? And I was like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, you're right. And that started my journey of true and utter grief. And the grief didn't look pretty. And there was days that I was really, really sad. And there was days that were really, really hard. And I had to be a mom at the same time, you know, because we had a child. And so those were some really, really, really dark days. But I feel like I really stepped into it. Like, I remember making a choice to be like, I have to grieve and I have to tell my people in my life what's going on.
Right.
So they're not like, Jesse, why aren't you like coming outside? Or like, why are you crying all the time? You know, because, and it's like, I had to tell them, be like, this is really, and they knew along the way, a lot of them, but just being honest of like, you know, the question of how you doing good. It's like, no, I was like, you know what? I'm not doing good.
Right.
I'm not doing okay. Right. You know, and really just leaning into that. What was your moment?
I think it took a long time. I think it took a long time to get there. But I think the moment is, I used to do this crazy math all the time of like, well, if we have kids here, well, then I'll be this age, and that when I'm this, you know, and it was all because of that fear that this is going to take forever. It was just a conscious moment. I don't know if I had a moment, but it was like this conscious turning towards the problem and saying, it is what it is. I cannot force. You know what it is?
Control.
I know what it is when we ran out of money. I know that sounds funny, but it's true. It was like, there is nothing more we can do.
Yeah.
I cannot force this issue anymore.
Right. That's true. I remember that.
You run out of all of your options. For us, it was like a huge part of that was running out of the finances to finance adoptions. And it was like, oof, what do we do? Okay, we have to face this. We have to turn and deal with the issue. And then even for me, that's when I started to deal with the grief. I started to go back and grieve that growing our family didn't turn out the way I wanted to turn out. It took longer than I wanted to. I'm older than I thought I was going to be, and that's okay. And I just the grieving process of that was incredibly important for me. And
what's interesting is there was a lot of trauma with adoption, which we can't necessarily fully go into. That's a time for another podcast for another time. Yeah. But the only way we were able to even deal with the trauma of our adoptions was to learn how to deal with our traumas of infertility and realize that the traumas that we were happening with our adoptions were triggers from then.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I feel like, because we had a lot of trauma with adoption as well. Like we thought we would like escape that. It's like, oh, that'll be easy. Right. It's like going to the store and getting a bag of chips. It's like, which one do you want? Doritos or whatever. Yeah. It's like, oh my gosh, no. It's insane. And that was really hard. But I think we had to like go back and do that to be able to heal from all that. And we still have triggers. Totally. I still have triggers. It's not like I feel like I feel like we've done a lot of grieving, but.
Okay. Recap. Infertility causes a lot of feelings. Fear is a huge feeling that it brings up. For you, I'm hearing and feeling like throughout this conversation that what it feels like to feel that fear is it's like an anxious thing, but for us, it felt more like grief.
Yes.
That's what the fear.
I think I was afraid of grieving.
Yeah, the fear turned into grief. Really, that's what it for us.
Because grief is surrender. So I had to surrender the idea that I wasn't going to be able to have kids, and I didn't want to do that. So a big thing that was helpful for me and my therapist helped me see was to name my child. And I was like, well, name my child that I couldn't have, my own biological child. Yeah. And I was like, well, I've had a name since I was 11 years old. It was my grandma's name, Ruby. Everyone in my community knew that that's the name I wanted. Anyone that named their child that, they'd be like, oh, Jesse, how sad. It's like everyone knew that I loved that name. Yeah. And so that was really helpful for me to channel my grief with that. Like, you know, grieving the fact that I won't have a birth story with her.
Right.
I won't breastfeed her. or, you know what I mean? And just really channel that. That was extremely, extremely painful. But I think that was the only way I was able to walk into these other situations with having no control.
Right.
You know,
and
to be able to go back and grieve that.
It's really the thing that you fear.
It was 100%.
You feared losing her in a way, right? Like you had her in your heart or mind or whatever.
Yeah.
And the fear is that you never were going to get her.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's sad.
That's
Thanks for bringing that up. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah.
But
that was helpful.
We can talk about it now because we've gone back and we've grieved those moments.
And it helped me move into foster and adoption without bitterness or resentment. Like, oh, you didn't fix that for me.
Yeah.
You didn't fix, you know what I mean? Because when you go and walk into foster care, they're already named.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
they're
people. They're humans. They have their own name. And our son was 18 months. We weren't going to change his name.
Right.
You know? So I think that was helpful for me to not walk in with really bitterness.
Yeah.
You know, like it's your fault or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Right.
Because I really went back and grieved. And grieving is not just tears. It's actually channeling it. And like, I remember I had like visions and I would like think about that. And then, you know, and just really picture the worst fear of not having our own kids and just really feeling all of those. And it's hard. Yeah. Sometimes it feels like I couldn't get out of bed, but guess what? I did.
Right.
You know what I mean? Right. So
my favorite picture of grief.
Oh,
and we'll end with this, but my favorite picture of grief is from a children's movie. And I sometimes wonder, what does it feel like to be terrified of something, but then to really embrace your reality and to grieve it is Toy Story 3. It's my favorite scene of any Pixar movie ever. And if you've never seen Toy Story 3, we'll paint the picture for you. Yeah. The whole gang, right?
All the classic
characters. Woody, Buzz, Jesse, Bullseye. What are the other ones?
Rex,
Slinky Dog, Rex.
Mm-hmm.
They're all trying to escape this giant trash. What is it like? It's facilitation facility.
They end up in the trash.
Yeah, they end up at this dump, and at the dump, all the trash is being funneled into this center fire pit, and it's just this giant raging inferno that burns everything up. Because it's a recycling facility or whatever, and they're stuck getting brought closer and closer into this inevitable doom that they know is approaching them. And the closer they get, they're fighting, they're trying to move their way up, and then kind of one by one the characters start to realize this is something they cannot avoid. It's like there's an acceptance of their reality that they're going to go into the fire.
And what a beautiful image of community I just thought. Because Woody fights the whole time. He's keep going because he like almost feels like he's the leader of the pack. Like he's got to protect everybody. And then he looks around and looks at his community and is like, oh, we're going to surrender.
Right. And one by one, they start to turn to each other. They're holding hands. And then like you just said, Woody at the end, he's fighting. And then he looks around and realizes everyone has accepted this. And then he has that moment. I could cry right now.
I know.
He has that moment. He grabs Buzz's hand, right? He grabs his
he grabs Buzz's hand and Bullseye.
And then he turns and he grabs Bullseye's hand.
Yeah.
And maybe Bullseye's on the end.
Yeah.
He grabs Buzz's hand and then he grabs someone else's hand. And there's like that moment, the little screen turns.
Yes.
And he like connects these two groups. And all of them have this emotional moment of saying, okay.
Got tears in my eyes.
It's like this moment of saying, we're afraid, but we've accepted this reality.
Yeah.
And we're embracing it. And I think that's so powerful. Yeah. Obviously, not to ruin the movie, but they get saved at the last minute by the giant claw.
But they have that 3 seconds of just accepting.
Right.
And it's okay to still you can accept it and still be afraid.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's exactly what it feels. The fear in infertility feels like that to me.
Yeah.
Where it's like this fear isn't going to go away. Yeah. It's not just going to magically go away. The fire, the inferno is not going to turn off. Mm-hmm. For some of us, sure, we will get pregnant through IVF. For some of us, we'll adopt. But no matter what, we have to turn and face it. Because if you keep running, you're going to run forever. If you keep fighting against it, you fight forever. The move that we need to make, or we could make, is that we turn and embrace. And I think that's for us what we've learned through our journey is that those moments where we turned and embraced it, we were still afraid,
still scared,
still difficult,
still kind of wanted to control it.
Oh, and still didn't want it to happen.
Right. Yeah. No.
But there was that moment, that like linking arms and the acceptance of it. And that's what grief did.
Yep. That is such a good example.
Now I want to go and watch that movie.
Let's watch it tonight. Everyone should go watch it tonight after they listen to this. Yeah. I think that's
thoughts.
I think the final thought for me is that just because I grieved it didn't mean that I wasn't afraid.
Right.
Or it's like, I think you're going to be like, well, I won't, like the fear will be gone and then I'll grieve it. And it's like, no. I was fearful of grieving.
Right.
And I was fearful of what the grief would lead me to, but I did it anyway. You know what I mean? And I think that and I think also not everyone can afford therapy, and I understand that too. Yeah. So it's like even just finding someone in your life that can kind of help you and guide you and just, or even just be there for you, where you can be your true authentic self and say all your things, because they're there.
Right.
In infertility, they are right here at the front of your mind.
Your feelings?
Your feelings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And right in your heart or whatever. And it's like, just find someone that you can talk to. I mean, a therapist would be the best, but I understand that not everyone can afford that. So that would be my takeaway, is just talking to someone about what is your biggest fear. Just because you say it doesn't make it more real. Right. I could never have said it, and it didn't make it any less real. Yeah. If I never would have said, I'm so afraid that we're never going to have kids, didn't make it not happen. It happened. Yeah. You know what I mean? Right. And it's like, what would that be? Where would that, you know what I mean? Because I think we have a lot of identity in this culture also to be like, you get married and then, or you have a long-term partner or whatever, and then you have kids. And it's like, there's so much on that. And it's like, okay, what would that look like if that didn't happen? Right. You know what I mean? Because we have so much identity, especially as women, I think of like, that's where I get my identity from, is becoming a mom. Mm-hmm. So I think, and that was for me, for sure. Mm-hmm. A lot of my identity was wrapped into that. Yeah. So I think, just because you don't say it doesn't mean it won't come true. Right. And you can be afraid and still grieve. Right.
The fear is there. And infertility causes a lot of fear. And for us, what it felt like to go through that, it felt like we had to grieve.
Yeah. What would you say is your takeaway?
I would say that for me, the fear doesn't magically go away. Yeah. That the fear that I was facing, for me, couldn't be solved. I couldn't solve it. There was no amount of money I could spend. There was nothing I could do to solve that fear. Yeah. I had to grieve the fear and face it.
And one last thing I would say, I think when people get pregnant out of infertility, they don't want to be excited. And it's like, being excited or scared doesn't change any of the path. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, right. It's like, that doesn't make, like, just because it's like, I don't want to get too excited yet. I hear that all the time. And it's like, being excited or not being excited, it's going to hurt just the same. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, yeah, maybe buying and designing their whole room when you're 1 month along and then you have to go into that room, like that might be more painful. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I think, infertility robs you of so many things. And I think that's something that it robs too, is like, it doesn't make it any less a reality or any more that you have any more control if you're excited or not. Yeah.
All right. Embrace the fear. Ugh. Face the fear. You can do it. It won't magically go away. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for listening.
We'll be back next Monday.
We will.